who are on the ballot this November to participate in our Town Hall Candidate Series. The first 3 of these events is back-to-back this evening at 5, 6, and 7. And I'm going to turn it over to our first candidate here. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. How's it going?
Good.
Good. So what I'll do is I'll introduce myself, and then I want to take whatever questions you have on your mind. But I guess until 5:50. So, but I'm Ryan Melton, 38-year-old father of 2 boys, married to my wife Laura since 2014. I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and spent a couple of years up in Lorenz, Iowa, which is Pocahontas County, and then made my way back to Omaha, graduated from Omaha Central High, and then went to Iowa State. So that's my connection to Central Iowa. So I earned my bachelor's here in history and political science. Then earned my master's in U.S. history from Kansas University. And now I run a team of 19 insurance professionals at a Fortune 100 company based out of Des Moines. I live here in Story County, so I live in Nevada, just about 10 minutes to the east. Usually the first question I get pertaining to my run for the 4th District is why I decided to do it. When J.D. Schultz announced mid last year that he wasn't going to run for a 3rd time, my initial interest grew off more around who was going to run next. Not thinking that person would be me. This has never been part of my life plan, even though I've been asked to run for public office from time to time. You know, I've got a very serious full-time job, I've got a wife and 2 kids, and so I have plenty of reasons to turn down those prior asks. But this time felt a bit different because, number one, by the time we got to early January of this year, it was clear there was a real risk that the Democrat was not going to be on the ballot here in the 4th District to go against Congressman Feenstra. And so literally there was a dinner conversation with my wife and I mid-January of this year, quite simply, hey, no one's going to do this. I think one of us needs to do it. And I said, all right, that's fine. Which one of us should run? And she said, well, you handle BS a lot better than I do, so you should probably do it. So, all right. But beyond that, to me, having a master's in U.S. history, I can talk to you all day, every day about the many good things we've accomplished through the mechanisms of our representative democracy. I'm also not naive enough to think it's perfect. It's far from it. There's a lot to fix. But we need to preserve and strengthen our representative democracy. And right now, January 6th really being a microcosm of what's at stake. That's also compelled me to run. If there was ever a time for people to have an all-hands approach, for people who normally don't get involved, to get involved, it feels like now's the time, where it really feels like democracy, representative democracy, it used to be sacrosanct. It didn't used to be up for debate, but now it really seems to be. And so it's really going to take us as people who normally don't put ourselves in these kinds of positions to fight the good fight. So that's why I'm doing it. This is really amplified. This need is amplified by who my opponent is, by who's running, right, or who's currently representing us in Congress. So Congressman Randy Feenstra, he was asked a couple days after the January 6th insurrection what his thoughts were as to those who stormed the Capitol. And he called them wonderful people that just got carried away. On a day that 100+ officers were hurt, some severely, on a day that led to the loss of life of a number of people. He voted against the Trump impeachment for his involvement in what happened that day, and he voted against the creation of the January 6th committee, through which we have really learned so much more about how directly involved former President Trump was in what happened that day. But not only that day, but a coordinated, concerted effort to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, prevent the seating of the elected government. So there's a lot at stake here, especially considering who's representing us, considering who my opponent is. But of course, I'm running through the prism of what our needs are here in the 4th District. And to me, the number one compelling concern that emanates all others are the massive population declines we've been seeing in our district for decades now. That's leaving our hospitals, our businesses, our schools, and our communities extremely vulnerable in the long term. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out why that's happening. It just takes someone with the political will to do something about it. And so far, we've had so many people representing us in Des Moines and Washington, D.C. that really don't seem to mind our 4th District really becoming a little bit CAFO, right? They really don't seem too bothered by the massive population declines. It seems like a strategy, a political strategy of sorts to drive people away. I'm going to push back against that however I can. So how do we do that? Well, number one, if you're a young person and you're trying to figure out whether or not you have the socioeconomic resources you need to build your family in this district, you're going to need childcare. And right now, we have hundreds of thousands of families that live in childcare districts. Childcare is often unaffordable and inaccessible to a lot of our people in the state. So the Republican-run state legislature in Illinois, their answer to this has been more deregulation. So lowering the age of how young someone can be to be responsible for a group of kids at a daycare. And they've increased the cap as far as how many kids a child care worker can be responsible for. This is amplifying the child care worker retention crisis because they are already overworked and underpaid as it is. Beyond that, our Governor Reynolds, recently signed a flat tax bill. My opponent wants to make the Trump tax cuts permanent. In my opinion, the Trump tax cuts were nothing more than a robbery of the U.S. Treasury. So when you have an extreme regressive tax philosophy, things will start to crater. We don't have to look too far as geography and time to see what happens in those cases. If you just look at Governor Brown back in Kansas, they had extreme flat tax and regressive tax policies, and their state cratered, and they had to scrap the whole thing. Okay? So I'm going to push back against that too, because child care experts and experts in a wide variety of different fields that care for the public good will tell you that if we hamstring ourselves when it comes to public tax base, we're not doing ourselves any favors as far as closing those gaps that we're going. And then healthcare. I am a believer in a single-payer universal healthcare plan, like Medicare for all. This is a big problem in rural Iowa where you have a lot of labor shortages. As we have, of the 36 counties in our congressional district, we have many where there's not a single OBGYN practicing. We have a massive shortage of mental health care experts across the 4th district. And hospitals are closing and are at risk. So if you're a young person and you overcome that first hurdle, you find affordable and stable child care, well, it's going to be then hard for you to find a stable doctor that you can rely on that's within a reasonable driving distance. I've rejected corporate PAC money since day one. My opponent feasts on corporate PAC money. He's not going to be the answer there either. But if you overcome those obstacles with no help from who's representing you in Des Moines or DC, you then have to find a job. And it's been really jarring to me that driving throughout the 4th district, talking to people, gathering signatures in the primary ballot earlier this year, how many very successful corporations in our state and in our district are still offering $10 an hour jobs for full-time work? And they're doing very well. Per Common Good Iowa, if you go back to what we talked about with child care earlier, Common Good Iowa has found that depending upon the county and the state that you look at, the living wage that a 2-parent household with 1 child needs to earn to keep their nostrils above the waterline, so to speak, is in the low 20s per hour. So if you have a 2-parent household and you're having child care affordability and accessibility struggles, more likely you're going to have one of those 2 parents that has to stay home. And so the other parent then has an option to work a full-time job for $10, $11, $12 an hour when the living wage needs to be in the low 20s. The math just doesn't work. Another reason why a lot of our young people are choosing to leave. When I want to do whatever I can to go to 4th district, they want to stay in and fight the good fight here. My opponent is literally one of the lowest rated members of Congress running the AFL-CIO. He literally is at 6% for his anti-worker voting record. I'm endorsed by him. I'm endorsed by the AFL-CIO. We need to raise that 7.25 federal minimum wage closer to that living wage. We need to bring back more robust collective bargaining and unionization, right? Because we know historically that when you saw the real concerted attacks on organized labor, on collective bargaining a few decades back, that's when we started to see wage stagnation and benefit stagnation. So we need to push back against that too. But then you've got to find a school. If you overcome all those other obstacles, you've got to find a school that's going to be stable. And we've seen Governor Reynolds and her attacks on public education. Doing her part to pull money out of public schools to fund private school vouchers, right? We know what happens in rural Iowa if your school closes. If your school closes, your community will not thrive long term. The NEA released a number that is absolutely jarring. We're facing a 300,000 teacher shortage in public schools across the country right now. because they're overworked and they're underpaid and they're being increasingly vilified by a certain group of politicians. Okay? I'm a defender of public schools. I think that our public schools are a great equalizer for our kids. I'm a part of public schools. I grew up in poverty, and if it wasn't for a public school teacher that saw the potential I had, if it wasn't for her pulling me aside and saying, I'm going to help you build a pathway, a vision where college is practical, I wouldn't have gone. Because my family, my immediate family, no one had experience with college, they weren't familiar with it, they just looked at it as more than. Which leads to another concern. We have, one of the reasons we have a labor crisis here in the state in the professional classes, mental health care, OBGYN, or healthcare in general, educators, it's because of college affordability. And that's a big concern for me too. And so while I applaud President Biden for starting us along a path to address that, there's still much to be done. Much that wasn't addressed recently that we need to address. I think this is an existential threat. You're seeing more and more young people that are deciding not to go to college. And when you guys go to college, I'm sure you already know, right? Many of you are going to have debt loads that are going to make it harder for you to be as flexible as you wish to be. We need advocates for you, people in office that are going to stand up for you, so that you don't have a burden, a massive burden that makes your life inflexible once you graduate, after putting in all that toil and all that sacrifice here in college. Okay? All right. Beyond all that, so those are the basic building blocks that a family needs to thrive. And we can already tell in our district, again, who represents us in DC, who represents us in Des Moines, it really feels like they're amplifying those obstacles instead of tearing them down. They're amplifying the reasons why our young people are leaving, and in turn, why many of our parents and grandparents are leaving, instead of tearing down those obstacles that will keep our people here. Okay? But even if you clear all those hurdles, you then deserve to live in a community where you feel safe and secure, where you feel like you can be who you are without being threatened for who you are. And people are finding it harder to live their lives that they deserve to live in that context in this district as well. In large part because, again, who represents us in Washington, D.C., and I'd say in Des Moines, in the governor's mansion as well, in the state legislature too. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Steve King, but Steve King used to represent this district a couple cycles back before my opponent. And Steve King was known to be a white nationalist. He was not afraid of saying rather racist and bigoted things out loud. That's what led him to being stripped of his committee assignments in Congress, and it was one of the reasons he lost. And so the Iowa Republican Party will tell you all day, every day, oh, Randy Feenstra is not Steve King. He puts on a suit and tie. He doesn't say the worst stuff out loud. He doesn't have to. His voting record does the talking for him. So let's take a look at that. So for people of color in our district, he's voted against the Crown Act. My opponent, he voted against the Crown Act, which would help prevent discrimination in the workplace. He voted against interracial marriage. He had the opportunity to codify that. He voted against that. He voted against a bill that simply would have removed Confederate statues from Capitol grounds. That's a Steve King vote right there. He voted, not only did he vote for this bill, but he introduced this amendment to the bill to try to reduce the amount of debt relief that black farmers received during the COVID pandemic, the peak of the COVID pandemic. No one asked him to do that. No one else was clamoring to put that amendment forward. He just decided to do it. Shameful. For the LGBTQ plus community in our district, he voted against the Equality Act, which would help us defend them against discrimination they face. He voted against codifying marriage equality in that space. Right? And then with the downfall of Roe, he's been absolutely giddy about the removal of reproductive rights for our people in this district, but he wants to go above and beyond that. He's pushing for a federal abortion ban, and when KTIV in Sioux City asked him what exceptions he would include in his ideal vision, he didn't say anything. He just said he wanted everyone to know how pro-life he was. In my opinion, that's not a pro-life position. That's a pro-forced birth position. And so I've been pushing back against that as well. And then veterans. You know, I think veterans are another group here in the district that are disrespected, that are disaffected. A lot of politicians that run for office know that we, on the ground, we care about our veterans, we respect them. And so what you tend to see is a lot of politicians, they use our veterans to cloak themselves in false patriotism. We have to dig into their voting record to see if they really actually care about them. So for Congressman Feenstra, he fails here too. He voted against an automatic sign-up bill for VA access. He voted against expanding educational opportunity for our veterans. And I think the most shameful of them all. So I have a friend whose husband just passed away from cancer. And they think that his cancer was caused by his exposure to toxic burn pits while they served overseas in the military. In March, when the Catt Act, which would expand VA access for the 3 million veterans who were exposed to toxic burn pits, many of which are ill now, many unfortunately have died. When this bill was first in the U.S. House in March, when there was no guarantee this bill would pass, my opponent not only voted against expanding that health care access for our struggling veterans, but they then went on a radio program to trash the bill, saying it was way too expensive, and there was another bill in the Senate that was, according to veterans advocates across the board, woefully inadequate to fund the problem. So we voted against it and trashed the bill. That bill then came back to the U.S. House in July because of literally a one-sentence procedural fix. They had to delete one sentence because of a procedural issue. But by then, my opponent and Republicans like him faced massive backlash for that vote against the veterans. And so we voted yes the second time. And I'm glad he did. But then what he decided to do is he posted on the U.S. House website of his, not only bragging about that July vote, but then saying he always stood up for veterans. And so this is the only situation, the only time that I've seen him actually respond to criticism on a social media account. Someone called him out for this, and he said, "I was for final passage of the bill." No, that bill was going to pass already. He was trying to duck under the fact that it was already going to pass to avoid the massive amounts of criticism he had already been receiving. People asked him more questions, he refused to answer, so I got in a social media forum and I answered the questions that others were asking. I answered on his behalf, because I thought that people deserved to see what the trajectory was there as far as his voting record. Gun safety. My son just turned 4 years old. He's in preschool now. They literally had a gun safety drill. He's 4 years old. We have parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters, people all over the country right now that are having conversations that are absolutely unacceptable for us to have. We cannot accept this as the new norm. Right? We're having it. My opponent has voted against every single gun safety bill that's come across his desk. Right? And when asked why, he says he doesn't want to inconvenience gun owners. Well, I have open forum events. Throughout my campaign, I pre-advertise where I'm going to be so Republicans, Independents, Libertarians can all come. Can all listen to what I have to say and question me. Because I believe that if someone is going to run for public office, they need to open themselves up to public scrutiny. That should be one of the top obligations you have. And so I've had a number of people that see things differently from me come to my events, and it's always cordial, right? Because we all want to figure this out. We just have different ways of going about it. But one thing that's been very clear as far as the gun safety issue is the fact that regardless of whether I talk to Republicans, Independents, Libertarians, or Democrats, gun owners are all the same. They have said in unison they are willing to face some annoyance if it means that leads to safer communities for our schools. Right? But my opponent just continues to brag on that A rating from the RA and keeps on moving on. I'll close on this, and I'm happy to take any questions you have. I am a big believer that climate change is an existential threat. I believe that if 97% of the scientific community is telling us that this is a man-made crisis, and it is existential, we should listen to them. That requires bold action. Unfortunately, like I said earlier, so while I reject corporate PAC money, my opponent feasts on corporate PAC money, and one of the big funders of this campaign is big oil. Right? He's written 2 op-eds that are really illustrative of the fact that he profits from the status quo. He doesn't want to change the status quo because that's how his campaign is funded. So he wrote an op-ed late last year saying that he was in support of a proposal by 3 companies where they are asking the Iowa Utilities Board, the state government, to allow them to take people's land away for eminent domain so they can plant these carbon capture pipelines. Now, if you're not aware with the technological nuance of that yet, there's a lot out there, so I won't bog us down with that. But in a nutshell, it's a plan that would marry us to the status quo and make it harder for us to transition to next generation renewable fuels, wind and solar, while taking people's hard-earned land away if you eminent domain, and putting a lot of pressure on our public health officials in rural Iowa who are not equipped and simply don't have the funding to mitigate a carbon capture pipeline fracture. That would be disastrous. If you want to know more about it, you can Google carbon capture pipeline 2020 Mississippi to see what happens to a community when you have a carbon capture pipeline fracture in your community. Okay? So I've been against that since day one. My opponent is in favor of it, primarily because those companies fund this campaign. Number two, he wrote an op-ed quite recently where he said, hey, those crazy radical liberals, one of his favorite pet names for people like me, well, those crazy radical liberals, if they get their way, and if we're all driving electric vehicles, 50,000 EVs from Tesla, well, joke's on them because there's no escaping the fact that our electricity grid is fueled by oil and coal anyway. If you did a control F on the op-ed, you would not see a single reference to wind and solar energy. Not a single one. And Iowa is one of the most robust producers of wind energy in the world. He is funded by the status quo. I know the status quo is unacceptable. We need change. We need more change. Anyway. So I'm Ryan Melton, running for the U.S. House, 4th District. I have buttons, handout cards, stickers in the back there. I'm at meltonforiowa.com, Melton for Iowa, my social media. But I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have. So whatever's on your mind. Any questions? Yeah.
So you talked about protecting democracy. Can you further elaborate on what that looks like both in Iowa and in the U.S. as a whole?
Yeah, for sure. Number one, I think it's absolutely unacceptable that if you have an elected public official that is knowingly lying in a way that tarnishes the respect that people have for the dignity of our electoral process, we actually need to have guardrails in place to prevent that. The fact that the Trump administration, Trump's inner circle, they told him there is no there. This election was not fraudulent, it was not stolen, but he proceeded anyway. He knowingly lied about our electoral process, and now we have tens of millions of people who still believe that election was stolen, and that is really damaging. Number two, we need more protections for poll workers. We're seeing a massive shortage of people willing to volunteer to do poll work this election cycle because of the vilification they've been getting from Donald Trump and some of his most fervent supporters. We need to protect them more. One example of this, I don't know if you know of the story of Ruby Freeman. So she was a poll worker in Atlanta during the last presidential election. And there was a conspiracy theory that Ruby Freeman and members of her family purposely stuffed the box when they were working at the polls with Democratic votes. This was proven untrue, it was investigated, it was clearly, decisively proven not to be true. But former President Trump singled out this person that in no way was seeking any popularity or fame or fortune. She was sacrificing her day for our democracy. Former President Trump singled her out and vilified her. And she got death threat after death threat after death threat and ruined her life and her family's life. Donald Trump is under investigation for a lot of things. He's not under investigation for that. And I think that's rather alarming. Beyond that, as far as the Iowa perspective, I think one thing that's really compelling to me about protecting democracy is unique to my race. So in my race for the 4th District seat, I am my opponent, not Brian back there, who Brian and I get along very well, but Randy Feenstra. Randy Feenstra is the only congressional candidate in this cycle who refuses to debate. So I literally went to the Iowa Press show on PBS. There's a really big desk there because it was intended for more people than just me. But there was an empty spot, he wasn't there. And he continues to evade. If you call yourself a representative, that inherently means you are there to represent the people. And the only way you can do that is to open yourself up to public scrutiny, right? right? And he's not doing that. Beyond that, as I've said, every single event on my campaign where, it was like a private house events, because there's some participants there, but so just about all of my events I publicize beforehand. And again, Republicans, Independents, Democrats, Libertarians, everyone comes out. And again, we're always cordial. We always are, even if we have disagreements, that's fine. My opponent, what he does, I've never seen him pre-advertise an open forum event. What he'll do is he'll go to a business during the middle of the workday, and he'll peek in really quickly. And someone will happen to take a photo of him while he's gesturing at a machine or something. And they'll say, "Oh, I visited another town. I'm getting out there." No, he's not. He's just setting the photographs. So we, in my opinion, I think every single person that runs for public office should be required to be involved in the debate. So, but honestly, there's so much more I could talk about there. I could go on all day, every day about that. There's a lot to dig into. Campaign finance reform. I personally believe that the moment you become elected in the U.S. Congress, you should never be allowed to be hired by a lobbying firm ever again, or ever. Because a lot of people run for Congress as a stepping stone to a much more lucrative lobbying job after. I would be in support of legislation to prevent that. Anyway, I could go on and on, but a very good question. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes?
So you mentioned earlier wanting to keep Iowa youth in Iowa
Yes.
to help the prosperity of our state. I have several friends who are actually studying to become teachers, and they have also faced these realizations that they're not supported in the workplace, and furthermore, rather than just funding, they're not supported by legislation. Recently, Kim Reynolds and several other Iowa politicians have been pushing for basically a bill that would make it so teachers have to submit their entire year's curriculum in advance so that parents can then get involved with their children's education and critique the teacher's curriculum based on their own opinions. So can you point to any specific promotions that you would make that would A, have teachers feel more supported in the workplace, and B, help parents be involved with their children's education without restricting the genuine education of the whole?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. We'll start with the most easy. If you, as a state government, are deciding to underfund your public education system, that should be a disqualifier right then and there. We have seen too many cycles now where those currently positions of power have deliberately decided to underfund public education in the state. Right? One of your top obligations as a public official representing your people should be to give them a robustly funded public education system. That's number two. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Over the past few decades, we've seen this really concerted effort to attack collective bargaining, to attack unionization. And we've seen the impact from that. If you look at the correlation between when those attacks began and when union membership started to decline, you also see wage stagnation and benefit stagnation. And our public school teachers, our public employees have not been spared from that. And so I'm a robust believer in bringing more collective bargaining to our workers so that our teachers have a solid, strong mechanism through which they can defend themselves in the workplace and advocate for their improvements. That's number two. There's a pension plan that our public workers and school teachers are part of that's been almost continuously under attack by Governor Reynolds, and that's a big disincentive. That's a big one. I talked to Lisa Banks, who's the president of the Sioux City branch of the ISCA, the advocacy group that stands up for public school teachers. And she said that she's never seen a time that's been more bleak in public education. When I talked to her 2 weeks ago, she said that a nurse just quit halfway through the week, not close to retirement age, and didn't have a job anymore. She just quit. Because she said, I can't do this anymore. I am literally putting my mental health and my physical health doing this job. And so, to me, what we need to be doing is is robustly funding our schools, addressing college affordability, which is, as I said earlier, leading to a crisis and now a shortage in our professional classes, right? And then also, there are a number of social things we should be doing to create safer communities, right? We need to be, so for example, I'm losing it. It's ended in the last year, the extended child tax credit, right? That program lifted millions of kids out of poverty. And one big problem we have right now is, Lisa was talking to me about this, in Sioux City, in that school district, I believe every high school but one has students going to high school that are facing really high poverty rates. And so what happens is we have teachers that are overworked and underpaid, and the funding isn't there. And they have very little prep time compared to when they used to have it. They don't have the time anymore that they'd like to have to identify when someone in the classroom is struggling with problems at home, driven by poverty, mental health concerns, and other things. Our teachers don't have the capacity anymore in our state. And that's another disincentive, another driver that's driving our teachers away because they feel helpless. They don't have the funding, they don't have the support to care for their most vulnerable. And like I said, they took a public school teacher to make college realistic for me. Because I dealt with a lot of poverty in my childhood, and college just seemed like a foreign concept that was not something for me. And unfortunately, there's so many kids that just don't have teachers now that have the time and energy to lift them up. But they want to. But they feel like it's hopeless, so they leave, right? Another thing we can talk about all day every day too. So, but yeah, I'm a big defender of public education. I was endorsed for the NGA, actually, the national branch of the ISCA. So, thank you for the question. Anyone else? Yes.
So, housing affordability in Iowa is something that is amazing. Most of the country seems unattainable at this point. What do you think the reason for that is, and what would you do to keep it that way?
Yeah. Well, number one, we haven't seen a lot of this in Iowa yet. This is one of the reasons. We are seeing this massive corporate buyout of property after property after property around the country. And they never intend to live in these properties. They're just using them to jack up rent rates. And so that's number one. We have to find a way to remove that undue influence in our housing market that's being caused by corporate interests. Number two, again, this is yet another area where college affordability is so important, because when you have so many college graduates coming out with massive amounts of debt, they're being priced out of the housing market from day one. And we know, and home ownership isn't for everyone. And that's, I never lived, my mom never owned her home, so we always lived renting. But we know that one of the things you can do to more quickly develop financial strength and independence is home ownership. And so many very young people are being priced out, right? Number three is there's really been a lack of emphasis around the country in building new homes, and not just new homes, but affordable homes. There's a big problem happening in our country right now. It's the NIMBY acronym, the Not My Backyard acronym, where there have been attempts to build more affordable housing nationwide, but people in the community often come out against it and worry about what that may bring. And so I think the city council, the state governments need to do a much better job being more proactive in identifying locations where NIMBY is not going to be a problem to build more affordable housing, because unfortunately it comes up quite a bit. I was at the Mission Productions Board of Directors meeting. So Mission Productions is a nonprofit that provides direct care services for the mentally and physically disabled. And one of the things they do is they find housing in that population. And they encounter this quite a bit, where members of the community will have that not my backyard mentality, and it really puts a lot of pressure on their ability to do what they need to do to house people that are the most vulnerable among us, right? And so I think there's a role that the federal government can play there in providing funding or grants for sites where you don't have to worry about that issue, so we can be proactive in new builds, right? Instead of trying to go into already built locations where there's obviously going to be a lot more obstacles for that and other reasons. So, yeah. Thank you for the question. I appreciate it. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, with regards to legalizing marijuana, I know the Democratic Party has one of their top 4 priorities, I believe. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
So my question to you is, have you been on that train for longer than a month? Because that's when I think the Democrats finally came to realize that it's important and they should have it on their platform.
Well, I think this is a bigger issue than just legalizing marijuana. I think it goes into, issues where we need to remove the mechanisms that lead to mass incarceration. And unfortunately, in our country, we're very good at imprisoning our people, and it's shameful. There are so many nonviolent offenders that are in prison from things like drug war, which has been an abject failure. It's just been a failure, right? And unfortunately, so the ACLU Iowa, I saw a number of that. So per the information we have, white people use weed at the same rates that black and brown people do. There's no great disparity there. But black and brown people getting arrested or pulled over 7 times higher, 7 times the rate that white people do in our state. That's from the ACLU Iowa, right? So this is a social justice issue. This is an equity issue. And all day, I've been a proponent of legalizing marijuana as long as I was politically engaged, politically active. This may mean absolutely nothing, but I have literally never been high before. So I think maybe that means a little bit more, this isn't, I think it's, I would get nothing out of that personally. But I know a lot of people that would. And the thing we don't hear an awful lot about is that marijuana oftentimes is the only med that works for people that are dealing with stress, anxiety, and pain. And so I think it's absolutely immoral that we have this plant that is innocuous, that's not harming anyone, that can alleviate so much pain and suffering and anxiety for people. And it's so easy to grow, so easy to obtain. But we have to be worried about it when we go to Illinois, one state over, and they've legalized it, and their state is really because of it. It's just absolutely illogical. So I agree with you. Yeah.
I was just going to ask you, it's related to the previous question, but under federal law and state law, you cannot simultaneously possess marijuana and firearms. Me personally, I don't think you should lose your gun rights to defend yourself just because you might have some cannabis products. I wondered if...
I would agree with that. I would
Okay.
agree with that. I think there are valid reasons for someone to lose their firearms. That's not one of them. That's not one of them. I don't know what the data is as far as the likelihood of someone committing a violent offense while high on marijuana, but from what I've heard from people, it seems that they may be least likely, or less likely to commit a violent offense if they're high on marijuana. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me either. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So we all know Iowa's made of very small communities. I've had some roommates who came from more rural communities and didn't believe that they actively getting involved in politics or even exercising their right of voting. How would you go out into smaller communities and educate them to get them stimulated to vote and to exercise their public right?
I've already been doing it, so great question. So we have 36 county congressional district, our 4th district that Iowa State is part of. So that's by far the biggest congressional district in the state. And so I've been putting in, so I have a full-time job, and I have a wife and 2 kids, and I'm campaigning for Congress all at the same time. And so I've been putting in 12 to 18-hour days since 83. I woke up at 7:30 this morning, and I've been doing nothing but congressional stuff all day. This is supposed to be one of my weekend days from work, right? But I've had public events, numerous public events in all 36 of our congressional counties, right? And most of those, the vast majority of them are in really small towns, right? And like I said, I prioritize those events, so I get a lot of independents and Republicans and libertarians come out too, right? And when people are in that room, and we're having a cordial conversation with someone who's running for office that doesn't shy away from questions, who doesn't take corporate PAC money, who has no paid consultants telling me what to say, my words are my own. It's refreshing to people, and so people open up about their life experiences, their concerns, their struggles. And so a lot of the preconceived notions about who politicians are and what they do at my events, and they seem to kind of go away. We can have real conversations, and it turns out that a lot of the, and this isn't just Republican Party only, there's Republican Party talking points, there's Democratic Party talking points, there's Independent, and Libertarian Party talking points. There is some kernel of truth in there, but when you have talking points, they tend to smooth out the rough edges, right? And generalize and oversimplify, which then leads us to think we're a lot different from each other than we actually are, right? And so what that has led to, when people get involved in that process for the first time, they hear someone speak for the first time. They're like, oh, Melton's not some corporate hack. Okay, I'll go listen to him. That's fine, that's good. I'll like him, okay. Well, then what happens is this. They see that, okay, I never plan on doing this in my life. I did it because I felt an obligation to do it, because no other Democrat was going to do it. And I'm still here. And we see, okay, wait a second. So if he can do it, and I certainly wasn't turned out of a candidate factory. I'm sure you can tell by looking at me, why can't I do it? And so it keeps building on itself. We need to have more people that are running for public office that are not corporate politicians, so they can speak honestly. And then I think that'll open up the floodgates of people more willing to get involved, because I think, my opponent, he's raised well over $1 million in Greg's Catt. I think we might get to 50,000, and I'm proud of that. But that's literally no money from corporate owners. And so that then leads to building upon itself to where people say, okay, maybe I'll run for office. But the number one stumbling block that we then face is a confidence issue. They're like, wait a second, this is not for me. This is not something I can access. This is impossible. I'm not supposed to be doing this stuff. I'm not made of money. I don't know wealthy people. Well, I'm not made of money, and I don't know wealthy people. And so I'm breaking down a lot of walls to show people what's possible. So we just need more people doing it. So there's people in this room right now that I'm sure at one point in time have thought about running for public office, but they've felt those concerns. This is too much. This is inaccessible. I can't do it. I hope to be an example that that's not true. And so if any of you are sitting here right now thinking about doing it someday, I really encourage you to do it, because when you run for the right reasons, the people will notice. And they'll gravitate towards you, and they'll lift you up, and they'll make it a lot easier, right? So, I hope that answered the question. That's kind of rambling, but I hope I got there. Anyway, any other questions? Yeah?
I've heard that the day or routine of a congressman is about 3 days a week, because you leave on Friday, and you spend Friday getting ready to leave, so you can go back and lobby your donors with your base to get you reelected. And then Monday is going back to Washington.
Yeah.
So you have Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday to actually work at your job.
Right.
Do you see you haven't given any thought to a cure for that syndrome?
Well, I think we need more people like me running for these offices. I have literally not spent a single second of my campaign time begging anyone for money on the phone. And I've had so many people tell me, like, oh man, how much fundraising time are you putting in? None. I don't have the time anyway. I've got a full-time job and a family. And it just feels like I get an email a week or 2 emails a week, and this has been happening since February, maybe January. Someone from DC saying, hey, let me run your campaign. I'll be your guy. And we'll make a lot of money off this. We'll build this thing. Politics too often is really just a cash cow. There's too many people that get a lot of money from it. And that drives disinterest and disengagement and disconnection, right? And so to me, I can't imagine ever spending a single second on a phone call begging someone for money. I just couldn't do it, even though that's what a lot of congressional candidates, what a lot of members of Congress spend a lot of their time doing. And so hopefully I represent a sea change there. I know the odds are tough in our district. I know that there are 85,000 more active Republican voters than active Democratic voters in this district, right? I know that. But I have a lot of Republicans that say they're going to vote for me because they see that my words are my own and that they can trust what I say. And they don't feel like most politicians allow them that, right? And so the other thing I'm noticing too, if you are an outside observer and you listen political wonk class, the well-read class who studies this all day. They'll say, young people don't vote because they don't care. I haven't seen that. What I have seen is the young people aren't going to vote for bullshit politicians that won't do anything for them. And so I've heard of a number of young people that go into political science to major, and I am a history and poli-sci graduate. And they don't stay because they're so disgusted with that kind of monetized cash cow mechanism that animates much of what politicians do, right? Like there's one story, this mom, her son went to Drake to get a BA in poli-sci. And he took 3 or 4 of his friends down. They all were majoring the same thing. They were going to change the world together. 2 years later, none of them were in poli-sci because they were so disheartened by the whole thing. But it doesn't have to be that way. I sleep peacefully at night because I do what I want. I say what I want. No one tells me, well, people tell me what to do. I guess it's up to me as far as whether I listen to them. But look at my FEC filings, right? And look at Congressman Feaster's FEC filings. I'm free to do what I want, and that's the way it should be. So, any other questions? No.
So you already sort of touched on this, but the 4th district is, as you said, a very red district. Is there any other reasons why Republicans should choose you over Feenstra?
There's a lot of reasons why. Let's go through them. So number one, well, I've already talked about the undue corporate influence in politics, right? That's number one. You don't have to worry about that with me. And again, I've had every opportunity. I've had hundreds of emails of everyone telling me in DC, I will run this for you. We'll get a lot of money. It'll be great. No, I'm not going to do that. That's number one. And a lot of Republican voters, that's the number one reason they say they're going to cross over and vote for me. Is they can look at the FEC filings and they look at Feenstra's filings. They're like, yeah, that Feenstra guy, he's really just a corporate guy. Yeah, he is. Half his words aren't his own. I don't believe my opponent believes half the words he says. I really don't. That's number one. Number two, public education. Right? So Governor Reynolds, this tells you about the significance of the undue influence of corporate power in politics. So Governor Reynolds, governor of a rather rural state, who, full of communities that respect and appreciate the public schools, right? So she goes on this effort to defund public education, but not only to defund it, but to then take that money and fund private schools. And she was so committed to this that she primaried Republicans during their election cycles because they didn't allow her to do what she wanted. And it didn't work. Republicans across the state appreciate public education. And they are terrified of what Governor Reynolds is trying to do. And they know that corporate influence is driving that decision making. So that's number two. Number three, carbon capture pipelines. So the further north and west you get. But there is actually one proposed pipeline that is proposed to go through Story County. So this is actually very local too. But typically the more north and west you get in the district, there's more and more animus against these carbon capture pipelines. And so I was actually at the Iowa Utilities Board protesting the use of eminent domain to take people's land away, to make corporations richer. That would in turn give the risk to the people on the ground. Shameful. And it's not a climate change solution either. It's a greenwash fake solution beyond that. I can talk about that all day, every day. Right? There's a lot to it. But at that IUB protest, I had Republicans, independents, libertarians who were fired up about it. And so it feels to me, the most basic right of being a citizen of this country is earning something, putting your blood, sweat, and tears into it, being proud of it, and not having it taken away. And I think the fact that my opponent is so openly okay with that, that's concerning. And then the final thing I'll say, because I know I'm at time, is reproductive rights. And this may surprise some people. They may say, well, wait a second, you're in a really red district. And journalists tell me this all the time. What are you talking about? You're in a really red district. That's why Feenstra is pushing for a federal abortion with no exception. So why are you talking about it? As I said, I pre-advertise my events. I have a lot of Republicans and independents and libertarians that come to my events. So that means, in turn, I've had a number of pro-life voters, people that consider themselves pro-life, that talk to me. And they tell me that Congressman Feenstra's stance is way too extreme. One of the many reasons they say this is they get a lot of people that were nurses or doctors pre-Roe who dealt with red blanket cases where pregnant people came into their practice dying from a pregnancy gone wrong, and there was no safe abortion available to help them. Right? So to me, I think there's a perfect storm happening. There's a lot of policy threads that are coming together at the same time. Right? And so I think that got a chance. J.D. Shulman only lost this race by 3% 2 cycles ago, running against a guy who has the exact same voting record as I do. Right? So I'm just going to keep on fighting the good fight and sleep peacefully at night because I'm doing what I want to do. And people will respond to that. Because if you run for the right reasons, people will gravitate towards you and help lift you up and build this thing together. So I'll end on that note because I want to be respectful. Rick, you're up next, I think.
I think I am.
Yeah, I was supposed to be in at 5:50, so I apologize. MeltonForIowa.com, Melton for Iowa, my socials, got buttons and stickers and handout cards back there. If any of you are interested in helping spread the word on campus as far as buttons, sticker, handout card distribution, anything like that, you can reach out to me on my social media or at meltonforiowa@gmail.com, melton4Iowa@gmail.com. And yes, it's me answering. I don't have any paid people, I don't have paid staff, so that's me answering if you email. So anyway, thank you so much.